If you think you're the kind of person who would enjoy a fun, safe, and inspirational romantic relationship, maybe even a conscious relationship, then this is the video for you, because I've got 5 very specific shadow work inspired shortcuts into higher relationship territory, which are genuinely unconscious for the majority of people I work with, and these are still very smart people who've already done several years of self-healing. They're very particular patterns. This isn't a beginner level video. I want you to stop chasing your romantic shadow by understanding your shadow relationship tendencies at the absolute bedrock of dysfunction, and hopefully catch you out in some of your own particular avoidance escapist mechanisms and other shadow boxing dynamics that you have. It's going to be a very fun video. I've got my post-it note here. I've got about 10 books in front of me, from very tame books like this to more out there books on alternative relationship styles, and even some particularly out there books with this kind of material and things like this. There's just 4 of them to hook your attention because we're on YouTube and everyone's attention spans are drastically shot. Let's go into an advanced video and talk like adults with point number 1, the first shadow pattern for you to stop chasing your shadow, and that is genuinely, authentically, and please, with real consistency, stop lying to your partners. Not in the big ways, not in the betrayal ways, not in the cheating ways, and not in the outright manipulative ways. Stop doing those little lies where you agree to do things that you do not want to do. If you don't want to watch a movie again this week because you want to focus on your creative passions, don't agree to watch the movie with your boyfriend or girlfriend. If you don't want to go to the family function, don't say with a smile on your face, "Oh yeah, I'd love to go." You're lying. You're lying. Yes, there's give and take in a relationship, but the main shadow compulsion that I see really festering beneath the surface of even very conscious relationships is this little lie trail. And it's all of the small agreements which generally, and this is a confronting thing to say, it's generally due to cowardice. Either the man or the woman in the relationship doesn't have the courage to be honest about how they actually feel because they're worried about the conflict that will ensue. This is the woman that doesn't want to say to her boyfriend or her husband, "No, I don't want to do that," because she's worried at a deep level, maybe because of something in the past or maybe because of his behaviors before, that he's going to get angry, he's going to shout at her, he's going to stonewall her, he's going to do something that damages her well-being. Or maybe it's the man in the relationship who doesn't want to say to his girlfriend or his wife, "Actually, you don't look good in that. Actually, the meal, I love your cooking. I'm so grateful you made this for me. I'd prefer if we didn't have this again." Rather than being in this hellhole situation where you're having the same meal that you don't like every single week for the next 20 years. All of these small things, and it seems so superficial because I'm not talking about the big lies. I'm not talking about hiding something which is genuinely destructive. I'm talking about all of those little lies which gradually build up over time, and they create little mounds of resentment which turn into piles of resentment. And if you've ever had this moment in a relationship before where you suddenly snapped at your partner, or you left them on red for a few days to try and get back at them subconsciously, just pay attention to how many things you agreed to which you didn't agree with. You lose respect with yourself on the inside every time that you say yes to something that's actually a strong no. Very strong no. Even my voice fails me as I say this. I see this tripping people up in so many client sessions. Very smart men, very smart women, high-level relationships where there's active trauma healing from both of the parties and they're really in conscious communication, but they've let a series of small, innocent choices which are ultimately cowardly conflict avoidance strategies become a real block between their love. Don't do it. If you know that you've already got some resentments that have built up, it is not going to be a fun conversation where you say, "Actually, I don't like this thing that happened, and you know what, I don't like this either, and hey, guess what, this also is bad." You don't need to do it that way. I'm being dramatic, I'm being angry. You should never have a conversation that way where it's you railing against them, but to take your partner's hand and say, hey dear, hey love, whatever you call each other, there's a few things on my heart that I want to share. They've been building up for a while, and I need to firstly apologize for not being truly honest about how I felt about some of these things. I didn't have the courage at the time to be able to really express what I meant, but I want to clear it out with you so that we can do better in the future. You're creating safety. You're admitting your fault of, I agreed to something that I don't agree with, and you're also providing an invitation that it's going to be better in the future, and whether you're a man delivering this to your woman, or you're a woman delivering it to your man, everyone feels safe. And even if the emotions come up, if you can remain solid and centered, again, this is the little lies. I'm not talking about big things. If you've cheated on your partner 10 times and you're going to go in with the, hey, I just want to be honest with you, and this is me being courageous, expect that you've done very bad things and they're going to be angry at you. That's a normal response. You can't bypass consequences because of bad behavior. But you can clear the mirror between the two of you, and you can make it really an open exchange rather than you both agreeing to things which you don't actually care about, and then maybe you can get to compromise. Or maybe not. Maybe you find ways of give and take, and there's so many particular relationship dynamics. The number one thing that I want you to pay attention to, the number one shadow unconscious pattern, notice your little lies, because I can guarantee if you're in a relationship, you've got at least one thing that's an ongoing little lie that you actually don't like. Them hanging out with a certain type of person, them going to certain kinds of situations, a certain language pattern or a certain joke that they keep repeating, a certain way of doing a certain meal or dressing a certain way, or the time that you spend together being intentional or unintentional. There's something in the relationship, because there's always going to be something, and you can clear out the communication between the two of you by just opening that up. I think I've said everything I need to say. Let's move on to number 2. Shadow shortcut pattern. Again, looking at my post-it note over here, this is a particularly triggering one. I'm glad that you're still here with me in the video. This is when you have given your shadow to your partner. And this is particularly obvious with issues around addiction, creativity, or business expansion or career expansion. One of the common unconscious patterns at the higher level of relationship healing is that one partner will be subjectively further developed than the other partner. If you're watching a video like this, you probably identify as the person in most of your relationship who is more healed. Being honest with yourself, maybe you're sober for longer, maybe you're the person who has more consciousness, maybe you've read more books, maybe you've done more workshops, maybe you've spent more time journaling and doing your inner work. 95% of the people who are going to be watching this video at this point will identify as the one who's more conscious, and although you've moved past old toxic trauma-based patterns of choosing completely unconscious partners, you might still have some shadow holding patterns where it's no longer something that you're expressing. You're no longer the one who's regressing into addiction. You're no longer the one who has no ambition and not moving on your soul-aligned intentional path of career and creativity. But maybe your partner is. Maybe you've chosen a partner who stays in that subjectively inferior position so that you can privately feel superior because it doesn't threaten your confidence or your self-esteem or your feeling of having your life put together. And this isn't meant as a punishing situation. I want to be really clear throughout this video. I'm not doing an us versus them dynamic. I'm sharing everything here to try and upgrade your relationship. And I've had wonderful messages from people saying they watch these videos with their partner. And it's so wonderful for me to know this. But if you know that you're in that I'm superior, you're inferior position, and you're playing that game subconsciously, privately, it's never come out. It's never come out in the literal communication of the relationship. It will come back to bite you because you're setting yourself up for a very subtle version of I'm the king of the castle. Butchered that one there. I'm the king of the castle and you're the dirty rascal. You're setting up that power imbalance. If it's there, or maybe you're in the opposite pattern where you're the one who knowingly has taken on the shadow of the relationship, you're the inferior one, you're the one who's always screwing up, you're the one who's never going to be good enough, and you're lucky to even be with them, that's a more obvious issue. But generally, if you're doing well in life and you feel like you're pretty much on path, you've got most of your life organized, you might be unconsciously in this inferiority dynamic, which of course over time can be shifted to superiority and superiority with appropriate levels of healthy enmeshment, healthy interdependence, where you support each other's inferiorities and uplift each other together. But you have to be aware of the dynamic, because you do not want to perpetuate a power imbalance which isn't intentionally and expressively transparent. Yes, maybe you're working on addiction issues together, and maybe there is a literal number of years or months which separate the two of you. That's fine. But don't harbor secret psychic fantasies of why you're better than them, and it will create distance between the two of you. That's something that's very confronting, but it's something that you need to work on. Point number 3, the shadow work, shortcut to higher level conscious relationships, and this is looking out. This is a very, very, very juicy topic. I'm going to try and cover it in just a few minutes and try and avoid some lesson, but unconscious, intimate fixations. A few books I'm going to recommend. If you start to go down the rabbit hole of looking at things like this kind of relationship dynamic, where you're doing things that involve more interesting dynamics, or you're maybe reading books like this one and you're learning how to get together, and you're reading books like this one and also learning how to experience new things together, and maybe you're learning about how to have transcendent experiences together. All in all, you're expanding your intimate pleasure experiences. You might get caught. Notice I'm avoiding the words in my shadow work library. I don't censor any of my language, but unfortunately, even though in the course I have an entire module on the intimate shadow with 0 censorship on YouTube, I can't say too many of the words without flagging my channel, so join me over there if you really want to go deep without any immature self-filtering. Playing with language games, if you are at the stage of your relationship where you have moved out of the pattern of it's all about me and now you're starting to give to your partner, this is the cliche. I can't imagine that probably nobody at this point in the video believes this. I will make a caricature from thin air. The man who's in his maybe 20s or 30s and it's all about him in the bedroom. She's only there to get him off. Very unconscious pattern, and likewise it could be the woman who had a particular type of conditioning and he's only there so that she can get off. That's like level 0, completely unconscious intimacy, where there's just no connection. It's like all that matters is that he has the outcome or she has the outcome being another word that begins with O, and then eventually at a different stage of consciousness you then shift. Men start to heal and they start to get fascinated by the idea of giving her multiple outcomes in a row. The first outcome, fantastic. Second one, the third one, he's spending half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours focused on her pleasure, and don't worry about that. It's not about me at all. He has swung into the shadow dynamic, and the same again, a woman can likewise be doing this. It's not gender specific, but if you're at the stage of fixating on the outcome within the bedroom encounter, such weird language, try not to say the words. If you're fixated on those outcomes, you are missing the next stage of the spiral from level 0 to level 1 to level 2, which is what if you become outcome independent? What if it's no longer about chasing results? Because if you really look behind the scenes, and this is every male client that I've ever worked with, I'll stick with men for the sake of teaching. Every male client that I've worked with is already years beyond the pattern of this is all about me and do what you will with my member and I will get the pleasurable release. So far beyond that. But they often get caught in the trap of then shifting into somewhat of a pseudo people-pleasing role. They take on somewhat of a Casanova kind of persona mask of being a powerful tantric lover who can create these wonderful lovemaking experiences. But if you really sit with the emotions behind the scenes, there's an insecurity. There's an insecurity and there's another degree of cowardice where you're hiding behind the outcomes and you're missing the opportunity to take your relationship to another level of power, authenticity, and shared vulnerability, which will bring even deeper experiences between the two of you. What would happen if neither of you had those explosive releases for one entire month? This is something that you can look at in Cupid's Poisoned Arrow, where the idea of Carezza intimacy is that you both forego those energetic experiences and then you get to have an encounter. You finish the encounter however you want to finish the encounter, but neither of you has an explosive release. You cuddle, you fall asleep, the next day the energy is still there. And it will continue to be there. This is retention for men, but it's also intentional practices in regards to breathing. But even then, the fundamental principle, rather than fixating on, okay, I won't release this time, and we'll release it this time, and almost getting a calendar where it's every full moon and you'll do it together. Whatever specifics you want in your relationship, that's up to you. What I want you to pay attention to at the unconscious level is if you start to get fixated on rules of shoulds and shouldn'ts within your lovemaking, because that's where it gets really sticky. It's almost not literally, maybe it does. I mean, it won't get too sticky if you follow some of this guidance, but the ceiling of not passing through to the next level of depth is when you've got conscious rules, conscious regulations, and you miss the opportunity to figure out what would happen if you weren't chasing results. Yes. Explore, expand, experience your bedroom how you want to experience your bedroom between the two of you, but also make sure that you're not falling into some form of a new, updated, supposedly conscious, people-pleasing, performance-based lovemaking, which keeps you from actually tapping into deeper authenticity. I'd need a whole video on this if I were ready to go into it. Hopefully, just going into that a little bit has given you particular dynamics that you can explore inside yourself. And again, I held up this book over here, which is an interesting... I'll try and find it on the bottom of the stack. Right there, that book over here. Maybe you develop a certain type of relationship with a certain domination-submission dynamic between the two of you, and you've got wonderfully conscious agreements. And again, this is an advanced level. Someone who's never seen that, they might be hyper-triggered by the idea that you'd even try and learn about any alternative intimacy techniques. Whatever, we're in more an advanced video, but even when you start to learn those next level techniques or you explore it together, not every couple needs to go there, notice that that dynamic can then become shallowing, because if you've now shifted to a domination-submission dynamic and you've lost the ability to be in more consensual, normal kind of dating dynamics, you've just swapped out one way of relating for another way of relating, and you've created a rigid structure around your lovemaking. Just watch out for it. So many specific avenues. Number 3, watch out for your unconscious intimate fixations and try and bring more communication both in the bedroom and between moments in the bedroom where you really tap into your unmet needs and desires and find a way to level up your love together. Take a moment now to shift over into the 4th conscious relationship principle, and that is collective shadows. Collective shadows, might as well advertise my course. I've got an entire module on the collective shadow. It's module 3 in the Shadow Work Library, and we're talking about the collective shadows of hostility and violence and very destructive things, but also collective shadows. In regards to the relationship between men and women, I've got a lesson in particular that's talking about men versus women and how we can heal the gender wars over in the course. The link is in the description. For the sake of this video, number 4, watch out for collective stereotypes. This is another advanced level shadow tendency, because even if you explore things like non-monogamous relationships, or you go deep into conscious relationships and like making marriages work, or you read a book, this is a very interesting transpersonal psychology book which is Transcending Both Monogamy and Polyamory by Jorge Ferrer, a very fantastic transpersonal psychologist. You can go deep into many different types of relationship structure. Maybe, for example, you grew up with the default tendency towards, I am an autonomous man or woman, and I also want an autonomous man or woman as my partner. We're both going to do this modern, liberal, career-driven, go and be in the city and have our own income stream, and that's the kind of collective stereotype that you choose. Again, the 4th pattern that you should be aware of is being aware of collective romantic stereotypes, and make sure that you're not just sticking on the label of one archetype and then ripping it off and taking another archetype. You might start with that power couple dynamic, then maybe you get burnt in a relationship after a few years, it all falls apart, and you're like, you know what, I'm never going to go for a woman like that again, or I'm never going to date a man who's so intensely focused on his career. I'm going to find someone who's more into the spiritual, more into the intimate and the communicative and the tantric spaces, and it's about softness and gentleness, and we're not so ambitious. We're going to go on the spiritual healing journey together, and you go to the various workshops, the retreats, you do intentional time out in nature, and now you've swapped to more of the tantric spiritual couple. That relationship falls apart, or maybe there's a change within the relationship itself, and you go into a situation where it's now I'm in traditional conservative man and you're traditional conservative woman. Maybe you go into homemaking stages where she chooses to stay at home with the children and you choose to go off to work, and you're shifting back more towards this dynamic of career focus. You're shifting out stages, and this is normal. This is normal. It happens throughout our self-maturation process. But what you need to be aware of is if you've taken on a collective stereotype of a relationship, and you're just wearing it as two people rather than as a single person. Because you can go into the hyper-focused entrepreneurial kind of archetype as a man, for example. If I were to go into that, I would then be a compatible match for a variety of different feminine archetypes. And if we're both wearing the persona or both wearing the appearance of being a certain type of man or woman, and here's our compatibility, guess what's happening behind the scenes? The mask will get revealed and removed, and it wasn't true to your character. Both people in the relationship need to be aware of when they're playing an archetypal game and it's not their true desire. It's very tricky to identify this, because maybe in your 30s you make a shift of, I'm going to go from career to family, or maybe actually you realize that you had children early and I want to go into my career, or maybe your spiritual path opens up, or maybe a creative path opens up, or maybe you go into a non-monogamous kind of various people coming together, or maybe you go into a different dynamic where it's actually you being exclusively single, you're going for that conscious celibacy, you're not dating for 10 years. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different relationship structures which can be consciously communicated and intentionally practiced between different people. I'm not going to say what's right and what's wrong. What I want you to pay attention to is, are you choosing authentically? And that takes some serious shadow work, because you need to know where your needs are. And to know where your needs are, you have to have done enough internal exploration to know your various parts and subpersonalities, your inner child, your future golden shadow, various parts that I've explored throughout this shadow work series, which you can find linked in the description. This is over 5 hours of free shadow work, high-level material on YouTube. Please join me in the full playlist. If you've found those parts, you need to listen to those parts, and then your partner also needs to have done that work, and then you communicate in a multi-level, part-by-part perspective if you're truly after a long-term, committed partnership. Just be aware. Be aware of when you're swapping out one scene for another scene, and if you're moving into spaces where all the couples are very spiritual, there will be certain standards, certain tropes, certain phrases, certain behavioral norms within that cultural subset, micro niche of dating that will be very different from the kink dungeon bondage space, and very different from the open relationship space or the conservative Christian kind of space. There's different standards and different rules and different ways of interacting, and maybe you'll pick from different ones, but just check. It's ambiguous because the specificities of your relationship and your character are what decide the outcomes and decide the ultimate path between the two of you. I can't give you the full example, so maybe we swap over into the final point for this video, the 5th shadow pattern that I want you to be aware of. We just touched upon it there, and it is an absolutely delicious one, and this is looking for the soulmate trap. Watch out for the spiritual shadow. I want you to read a book like Halfway Up the Mountain, which is a series of high-level explorations on spiritual narcissism, spiritual bypassing, all kinds of spiritual avoidance and spiritual distortion. I feature this book inside of my course in the final module on spiritual sicknesses, an entire module in there on spiritual shadows. But for the sake of one single point as it applies to your relationship, just watch out for the terminology and the narrative and the fantasy of soulmates or even twin flames. Just watch out for when you spiritualized your romance and you might be leading yourself into delusional territory. I have unfortunately had dozens of conversations with people who are very genuinely spiritual people, and they're looking back on previous relationships with someone who they thought was their twin flame or their soulmate, and it was a trauma bond. It was definitely a trauma bond with a bit of a sprinkling and a bit of a wrapping of spiritual grandiosity, their personal grandiosity, their partner's grandiosity, the desire to shed away an old ego structure and take on something which is more authentic, but the authenticity was lost in the game of playing a spiritual performance. Two people like that come together, and there you have your divine twin flame union, and you justify through spiritual language why one of you is hyper avoidant and the other is anxiously fixated on spending
far too much time together, or whatever the particular dynamic might be. Yes, I have lots to say about the potential twin flame delusions and distortions, but even that level of conversation is something I don't want to linger on. I want to go to a higher level of the conversation, which is if you know that you started your relationship or you went into a stage of your relationship with a lot of spiritual charge, a lot of soulmate energy, maybe you both had dreams about each other, maybe there were synchronicities, maybe the stars aligned and it was a certain planetary motion, or maybe just you kept bumping into each other and it seemed like it was fate. Yes, it might be, but just beware that narrative, and maybe, as a completely zoomed out perspective, if you are soulmates who are meant to be together forever, you'll be better able to assess that after 5 years, 15 years, and 50 years of partnership, rather than the first 3 months, because the bedroom encounters are particularly spicy and exciting. Just watch out for when a narrative, a faithful, hopeful, very genuine narrative of we can do this, we can be partners all the way into the cosmos, when that comes up a little bit too early, with a little bit too much intensity, and pause to have the conversation with your inner child of, is this a salvational fantasy? Is this a rescue fantasy from a more immature part of myself that didn't have so safe a situation in childhood? Maybe my mother, maybe my father, maybe the overall environment. Is this me doing some version of that to try and keep myself safe into the future by layering on this soulmate narrative? And I know there's many perspectives on soulmates, the idea that you have only one soulmate, or you have many soulmates that are here for particular lessons, for particular reasons. You can meet someone at the train station and they're a soulmate from your soul group and your soul family and your soul tribe. I'm not going to get lost in the esoteric particulars of those philosophies. You understand what I'm saying? If you have a particularly strong spiritual charge within your romantic relationship, yes, it could be genuine, and yes, it can also be disgenuine. Find the space in the middle ground, almost like a butterfly of actual, authentic relationship flourishing, and you will have a much healthier, much more stable relationship, and it won't feel like a bubbling enthusiasm that you're in the best thing ever. That true knowing is more of a quiet, warm feeling in your chest when you're watching your partner doing something very normal. And it's that small smile, it's that deep love, that deep appreciation for them. Or when you're out somewhere and you think about them, and that same inner warmth, not a flurry of emotions that sets you off into a very hyperactivated state. That can be part of it. But the deep, deep well of spiritual knowing is usually much quieter, much deeper, and that's what I want you to focus on. If you've already established a relationship based on all these soulmate principles and various twin flame dynamics, see what happens if you open a conversation with your partner and say, what would it mean if we weren't soulmates? If they get very angry or very avoidant or very scared, and they're not level-headed with you. Something for the two of you to work out, because it indicates that it's not about you, it's not about the two of you together, it's about a story which has some unresolved charge inside of it, and that's a very unconscious behavior that is almost inevitably going to collapse with enough months and years further down the road, because you need many aspects of relationship integrity, not just a spiritual overlay that covers up the trauma-based inconsistencies. What a dark way to finish up this video. I will quickly recap the 5 principles overall, and please take the time to actually think about this. Number 1, shadow awareness, unconscious pattern. Watch out for the little liars. Don't agree to things that you don't agree with, because it will eat away your self-respect and you will feel like a coward in your own relationship. Number 2, please watch out for when your partner has been given your shadow in terms of addiction, creativity, intelligence, expansiveness, whatever it might be. Don't give them your shadow to hold. Integrate it into yourself. Number 3, unconscious pattern. Watch out for those unconscious, intimate fixations when you're choosing to go for all kinds of explosive, pleasurable outcomes at the cost of going into a softer, more subtle, more sustainable, more ever-present kind of connective energy between the two of you. You have to read those books that I held up and go there yourself. Watch out for that particular pattern. Number 4, look out for the collective shadow stereotypes, and make sure that you're not swapping out conservatism for liberalism with a flair of spirituality, a bit of liberal spirituality with less commitment in an open form, or maybe some other form that has a particular sect, or maybe this one and that one, and you're not just swapping out the masks and pulling them on, pulling them off. See who you actually are and who you actually want to be in a relationship with, who you want to build with in this very limited time on this earth, and create a deep love, which is truly what you both want. As it continues to evolve, not a fixed thing, yes, you will change your relationship structure from the dating phases to the commitment phases to maybe the family stages to maybe the grandparent stages. It will change, but make sure it's a real change that works for the two of you. Don't get lost in a collective stereotype. And finally, the fifth point, looking at my post-it note, just watch out for the spiritualized overlay of inauthentic, hypercharged romance, which has its fun, has its benefit. Maybe God has put the two of you on earth at this particular time to have a beautiful connection with divinely inspired, fateful destiny. And also, it could be something else. That's a conversation for the two of you to have, and it's a very fun conversation with very deep trust on the other side of that discomfort. I hope this video has been useful for you. Again, final invitation, if you like the depths that I go to here, this isn't even a fraction of how deep I go inside my Shadow Work Library course. I read 600 plus books to then condense it down into just 36 books. You can find the link at the top of the description, or you can join me in the final episode of this Shadow Work series, where we're going to be learning how to become powerful without becoming tyrannical. Join me over here in the final episode of the Shadow Work series, and it's time to gain some true power.